the keynote event of the third annual Truth and Transformation Conference of the Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability Project at Harvard University. We are here at the Harvard Kennedy School in collaboration with the Harvard Institute of Politics, kicking off this wonderful conversation about the future possibility of a truth commission in the United States. We have with us this evening, in addition to my amazing colleagues who have helped to make tonight possible, and the undergraduates who are leading the IOP, we have Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Professor Melissa Harris Perry. I consider them two of the world's most important leaders on a number of topics, and of course, experts most especially on equity and justice in the world. So this is a really delightful opportunity for us to hear from both of them and to learn about what's possible going forward. The theme of this year's conference is looking back, paying it forward. And while tonight is just the beginning of the conference, most events will take place tomorrow. Most of what we are committed to is understanding how to understand the past, how to reckon with that past as the benchmark for measuring progress in the future, what debts are owed, what conversations need to be had, what kind of community do we need to build in order to have a better future. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way and formally introduce tonight's panelists. Congresswoman Barbara Lee is the U.S. Representative for California's 13th Congressional District. She is a force for progressive politics in Congress dedicated to social and economic justice, international peace, and civil and human rights. She's been elected to Congress consecutively since 1998. She is a former social worker by profession and has been a lifelong advocate for her constituents, for families served by Congress, as well as others seeking the support of government. She is a strong proponent of safe communities, addressing hunger, environmental justice, universal health care, immigration policies that are just and humane, as well as the establishment of a living wage, reproductive health care rights, and affordable housing. Her accomplishments include co-authoring every major piece of legislation dealing with the global HIV/AIDS issue since she was elected to Congress. She is currently a member of the House Appropriations Committee and the chair of the Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations. She also serves as co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee and is a former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. As a member of the House Democratic leadership, she is the highest ranking African-American woman in the U.S. Congress. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Really an honor to be with you, and thank you for that introduction, and thank you so much for getting it and understanding the moment we're in and the context in which we're having this discussion. So really, really do appreciate it. Professor Mahal.
Oh, sure, Khalil. And we are going to have this conversation that is to be led by Professor Melissa Harris Perry, who is the presidential chair in the Department of Politics and International Affairs. She is also in the Department of Women and Gender Studies and the program in Environmental Sustainability at Wake Forest University. She teaches courses on American politics at the intersections of race, place, and gender. She serves as host and managing editor of The Takeaway, one of my favorite shows. You can hear it on most NPR stations around the country. It is a daily national public radio program. It also comes as a podcast distributed by WNYC and PRX. Professor Harris Perry, you might also know, is the former host of the Melissa Harris Perry Show on MSNBC, which is not in the bio I'm reading, but I could not help but remind everyone watching how important that platform was for so many years. She is the founder and president of the Anna Julia Cooper Center, whose mission is to advance justice through intersectional scholarship and action. And along with Dorian Warren, also my friend, Harris Perry is co-creator and co-host of the Takeaway special project, Deep Dives with MHP and Dorian, as well as the podcast System Check. Professor Harris Perry, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mohammed Khalil, my friend, my colleague. Thank you for the invitation. Anytime I have an opportunity to be in conversation with you, anytime I have an opportunity to be in this conversation with Congresswoman Lee, I will drop all the things and be here. And just a quick shout out to all of my Wake Forest students who are supposed to be in class right now. Remember, this is class right now, so you better be here.
Have a great conversation.
Thanks. Okay. Congresswoman Lee, first of all, I certainly learned this during the pandemic, so I just want to really come to this and start first with, how are you? How are your people in this time of continuing disruption in terms of our health, in terms of our politics? Just really, how are you?
Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to see you, and I'm doing fine. The big issue, I think, for me is making sure people know that COVID is not over and these new variants are on the rise, understanding, the decisions to make, wear masks or not, or space or not. But I'm concerned just about what's coming. I serve on the committee that oversees CDC and Labor, Health and Human Services. And so I have a 102-year-old aunt, and I'm on airplanes 5 times a week in 100 different countries. And so I stay masked because I test as much as I can every other day, because I don't want to be one who's going to transmit the virus. And people say, why are you wearing your mask? Well, I say, COVID's not over. You guys don't know my lifestyle, so I'm trying to protect you. And so that's how I am, just trying to get everyone to understand that we still have to be very careful, understanding we've come a long way. Thanks to President Biden and our vice president and the House of Representatives, the Democrats, we've come a long way. We've saved lives and livelihoods. And so I feel really good about that. But I also am concerned about the new variants and people feeling too relaxed. And that's a big concern of mine.
I so appreciate the spirit of that response, that, certainly all of us are concerned about our own health and well-being, but that in so many ways, what we learned through this pandemic and living even in the context of this moment is that we also have to protect one another, right? That we live in community, and it is not only about whether you yourself are immunized or boosted or, protected or healthy or strong, but whether or not you can, as a member of our citizenry, protect each other.
That's exactly it. And let me just say thank you so much for saying that, because just an example, in 10 days, I was in Italy, Germany, Senegal, Ghana, back to California, back to Europe, back to Arizona, Texas, you name it. Up and down, and no one's masked on the planes for the most part. And so that's it. We have to be our sister's keeper, our accusing people. This is about telling the truth, because that's the only way. That's psychology. I'm a psych major, 101. You have to come forward and tell the truth before you can heal. And then once you heal and go through that process, and this is a process that's used all around the world, then the transformation, that's HR 40. I've been working with Congresswoman Jackson Lee, formerly Congressman Conyers, for so long on reparation. We have to get there, but you have to go through processes to get there so that the public is there with you. And so that those who have been harmed, which millions, all of us as African Americans have been, the country understands, yes, we've got to do this. Repair the damage. And so after Donald Trump came forward and all of the issues around white supremacy were swept from under the rug, I thought this was the time. And I came together with some phenomenal individuals. We have a wonderful commission, a committee of about 15, 16 people who are across the board activists, academics, just unbelievable multiracial coalition. Beyonce supports this. Alicia Keys supports this. I just have to tell you, a lot of people around the world support this. Mary J. Blige, 350 organizations. Folks really understand this. And so we're ready, but we have to make sure that reparations, HR 40 moves, and we're trying to make sure the public understands HR 19, which is my Truth Commission, and HR 40, which is reparations, that they go together. You can't, okay. And so that's what we're doing.
All right, I want to talk a little bit more about HR 19 for a moment, both the actual proposal, but also, I talk about this with my students often. When we think, when we get to King holiday, there's often this moment where we talk about King's dream, right? And we sort of freeze him in this sort of one moment in 1963. But I always like to go to his final public address where he tells us, and I take him at his word, that God took him to the mountaintop and allowed him to see over into the promised land. Dr. King tells us that we're going to get there, but Dr. King doesn't give us what he saw. He says, I looked over and I saw the promised land, but he actually doesn't tell us what he saw. So we're going to drill down on a lot of the problems, but I want to start with envisioning. I want to just start with the possibilities, because I think there is value for all of us in imagining where we're going and having some shared vision. So if you were to look over into a maybe more narrow promised land of HR 19 becoming a reality, talk to me about who would populate this commission and what it would do. Would it look like what we've been seeing with the January 6 hearings, or would it look quite different?
Well, we would want first, let me just first say that there are commissions around the world, around the country at the local level. Dr. Christopher, who's a member of our commission, a phenomenal academic, phenomenal historian, phenomenal scholar. She has established through, I think it was the Reynolds Foundation for years, truth commissions in communities, which have led to some form of reparations. And so it's not like this is brand new in this country, because we've been doing it at the local level, but it would be up to how we negotiate the commission. I want it to be a national commission, but it's got to have people who are impacted by the legacy of slavery. We've got to have young people to vision what the future looks like without these barriers of systemic racism. We have to have academics and historians, and we have to have a couple of politicians on it, because they have to help shepherd the reparations and the final conclusion of this process through the United States Congress. And so, it's got to be intergenerational, it's got to be intersectional, and it's got to be people who, and I want to have someone from the United States Institute of Peace, and we're just brainstorming right now because we haven't even gotten that far. But the U.S. Institute for Peace, and I've talked to them, they have envisioned this all around the world. Some of them have worked, some haven't. Rwanda, South Africa, you look at 41 countries. They have a formula for what works and what doesn't work. So I would want them, even though I fund the U.S. Institute of Peace, but their mandate's only for commissions abroad. So I want them, and I'm trying to get the funding and the direction for them to help us in the United States, because we have our own unique character here of racism and institutional racism. And so we have to get their input and their insight into what works and what doesn't work around the world, and then apply that to our own place here. So it's how, we have to envision this, but we know the outcome already with what we want, but we've got to walk it to that point, because the outcome has got to be repair the damage. That's got to be the outcome. You can't just move forward and heal, without transforming this country. And that means reparations.
As you talk about the reparative aspect, right? That it is truth, it is healing, it is the reparative aspect. It's not lost on me that we are speaking virtually, but at Harvard in some way, and that the U.S. Supreme Court in this term is going to hear an affirmative action case that includes Harvard University as its, in its title. All that is left of affirmative action at this moment is a diversity argument, right? That there's value in having diverse classrooms. The reparative argument has been struck long ago, right? At this point, more than a decade ago. Do we need, even as we are probably facing the end of affirmative action as we know it, do we need to bring back an affirmative discussion about the reparative aspect of affirmative action? That yes, diversity matters, but the other part of this is dealing with institutional harm.
We've got to do that. Otherwise, we're going to be going in circles. We'll never dismantle and disrupt those systems that have led to this. Okay, so we've got to do that. And Judge Katani, I'm so proud, Katanji, she is just like laying it out there during her questioning and debates on the Supreme Court. In terms of the context, in terms of, she's brilliant at how she has done this. laying out the historical context for repairing the damage. So yes, we've got to do that. And in California, Proposition 209 ended affirmative action when I was in the legislature. And I led the effort to try to stop that, but it went up. It passed. And since then, we've been trying to repeal it, but we still can't get a repeal. But what has happened is not only did we lose the reparative aspect of affirmative action, but when you look at what it has done in terms of University of California, very few African-American students. When you look at what it's done in terms of employment in state service, very few African Americans. When you look at what it has done in state contracting, very few Black businesses. And I'm telling you, not only did it, it worked for what they wanted it to do, because it has really turned the clock back in California to really a tragic moment when the only way we can address affirmative action is through federal resources that come into the state, which still have that close semblance of racial equity in some of our policies. So it's really bad. And we have got to talk about repairing the damage, because otherwise, all the work that we've done, everything that people who've done and fought for before us, all that's going to be turned back and be dismantled. And so so the critical part of our historic human rights, civil rights struggle, freedom fighters, what happened after Reconstruction, all of that did not repair the damage of the past. And so I think we have to realize that that's the missing link to move forward, to make this a country that really is about liberty and justice for all.
You've brought us to California. Now, certainly you are representative out of the Bay Area, which is about as far from LA as across the whole East Coast. But nonetheless, it is California, and the news out of California right now, let's call it the kerfuffle or the scandal or just the painful discourse emerging from the Los Angeles City Council over the course of the past week and a half or so. I'm wondering, as you're watching this, what it says to you about the possibilities for multiracial democracy.
Well, what it says to me is, as racist and as horrible as what took place, and they all should resign. I mean, it was a moment to talk about multiracial democracy, and it's a moment now for communities of color to come together. And I think if there is a silver lining, I see so many people who are non-Black saying this is wrong. We're going to deal with this. We're going to not let this happen again. And we're going to try to figure out these systems that allow this to happen. So that's the silver lining. What I'm seeing in LA are people coming together, across race, cross gender, and cross generation. It's multi-generational, intergenerational, saying we're not standing for this. And I think there are more of them than those who really just in the despicable way they talked about African Americans. Boy, that child. This was like mind-boggling in 2022. And so so I think and of course I'm supporting Karen Bass for mayor, and she's going to win. And I think she's the one to really move that county, that city forward in a multiracial fashion. And so, so that's the optimism and the silver lining in what took place in such a despicable conversation and action.
I want to note that that question was put on my agenda by one of the students in my class, whose name is Jackson, who I've been teaching on and off for a couple of years now, as he's sliding into his senior year, having been a freshman. And he's like, I really want to hear from the representative about what's happening in Los Angeles. And another student of mine asked a question that I feel like you brought us to in part by talking about the rollback around affirmative action, that we had a set of rights and then we didn't. And so I think you probably know where I'm headed here. This is a question, frankly, about reproductive justice and how we are in this post-Roe world, in this Dobbs decision world. So I have a student, Beth, who wanted me to ask you about the connections between racial justice, which we're here to talk about, and reproductive justice and how they're connected, especially through the bodies and lives of Black women?
Boy, what a great question. You got some great, brilliant students, and I know you're bringing it all out. And from day one, there's been this connection between reproductive justice and racial equity and reproductive rights. Let me just give you a bit of my history. I was a staffer to a great member of Congress, Ron Dellums. In the 60s, Henry Hyde instituted the Hyde Amendment. Okay, I mean, in the 70s, it was late 70s. I was a staffer then. I was furious because what the Hyde Amendment did was it said nobody, it denied Black and brown women, poor women, access to the full range of reproductive health care that white women and women with resources could have. So it's discriminatory and it's racist. So what has happened is women who are low income, primarily Black and brown women, haven't had access to the abortion care that they need. They have to scramble, they have to figure it out, they have to do everything in the world. So when I finally was elected to Congress, I said, I'm going to do something about this. I was a staffer then, right? I said, and I told my story recently about what happened with me and had an abortion. And so this has been a passion of mine forever. And so I said, I'm going to repeal this Hyde Amendment, first of all. Democrats said, oh, you can't do that. That's the Holy Grail. This is something you can't touch, right? But there was a group of young women, Black and brown women, and progressive women around the country who formed the All Above All Coalition. And they came to my office because they knew I wanted to get this repealed years ago. As I said, okay, let's do it. And so we tried, couldn't get hardly one Democrat to support us, right? Yeah. So we regrouped, we did polling around the country. These are young women, mind you, around the country, came to my office, we worked together. They went out and took another year, did polling, did education, did messaging, came back, we decided, okay, so now I'm gonna take it to the pro-choice movement. Planned Parenthood, NARA, all the big groups. Oh boy. No, not quite. So then I took it to our Democrats in leadership. I took it there. Oh no, not quite. Went back, talked to the group. We said, well, we're going to do it anyway. So we proved, and All Above All Coalition had the data, the messaging, and all of the issues around discrimination and how Black and brown women and low-income women, it was the Justice Party. We showed them, it was documented. And finally we got folks to say, okay. And so I introduced the EACH Act, which would repeal the Hyde Amendment in law, right? And I'm sharing all this because of the justice piece. Yep. So I introduced it and everyone was like, ooh, really jittery, but they couldn't stop us because these young women were everywhere in the country now in their members of Congress office. They thought I'd introduce it with maybe one or two co-sponsors, right? Introduced it with 30, including the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler. We introduced the repeal act of the Hyde Amendment and just kept going. Now I have about 165 co-sponsors for that. It's taken all these years, but it's been people who've been organizing in their communities to get members of Congress to do this. And we're going to get this done. But having said that, in the meantime, it's in the appropriations bill. Okay. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. It's in the bill that I have responsibility for. And I said, look, if we're going to keep keeping the Hyde Amendment in the appropriations bill is wrong. We're going to take it out. First few years, oh, you can't do that. We can't get the bill passed. So the All Above All Coalition, all of our women and men around the country got to working with their members of Congress. We got that repeal taken out of the appropriations bill 2 times, passed the floor almost unanimously with all Democrats, of course, but even Democrats who were leery began to understand why we do that. Now it's in the, we're trying to get it done in the Senate. But I'm sharing that, and we finally got the president to say he knew that it was an issue, the Hyde Amendment of racial justice. And so he's on board. So I'm saying this takes long. The arc of the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And so now with Dobbs, we got to do the same thing. We got to push back. We have to make sure these states that have passed these draconian laws, that states like California, which is really a safe haven, that we provide the resources for low-income women, Black and brown women, primarily in the South, who need and want and access, that we are able to help them until we can pass the final bill that we're trying to get passed, the Women's Health Protection Act. And President Biden the other day said he would sign it. So I'm just saying this because you have Democrats, and I can be partisan, you don't have to, but we have Democrats on our side finally to do this. But it's taken years and years and years. So don't give up hope. Keep mobilizing, keep organizing, and vote. It may not happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen.
Listen, I feel like I want to underline, I want to pause for a moment for every student at Harvard, for every student at Wake Forest, for every person who is a student of politics who is listening, that, Congresswoman Lee actually took us through that fairly swiftly. But we're talking about, just if you can hear the parts of that, right? The intentionality, the movement through multiple Congresses. Think of the presidential administrations, the leadership changes that we experienced during those decades, the movement through a fairly complex process to make legislation work. Representative Lee, what gives you the courage and the tenacity to keep going, not only on this issue, but on so many?
Well, Dr. Harris Perry, I'm a Black woman in America. Now, if that doesn't say it all, please, we ain't no way tired. Come on.
Listen.
No. We have to deal with self-care. We have to, understand our personal lives and have that in order. But it's like, please. And, and I like to share the story when people ask me, how do you do it? And, aren't you tired? I said, when I was a very small child, my dad was in the military, Lieutenant Colonel, 25 years. And we lived in Berkeley. He was stationed in Monterey and wanted to buy a house in San Leandro, California. Okay, now San Leandro's next to Oakland. And if you're coming from Texas or another state, if you're Black and live in the Bay Area, you drive around San Leandro because they burn crosses, okay? That was Klan territory. It was racist. It's in California and it's next door to Oakland, but you don't go there. So my dad and mom wanted to buy a house there. And my mother said, you're not going to get a house there. He said, I'm going to put on my uniform. Yes, I will. So they went out to the realtor and they were run out of town, out of San Leandro, okay? But I represent San Leandro in Congress and in the state legislature. Okay. I represent that community. So, it's like, come on.
Wow.
It's true. So,
wow.
Yeah. So you got to believe in this stuff, and you got to believe that those forces out there, those evil forces, are going to stay evil until the good forces rise up and beat them back. And we can do that. I know we can.
All right. You're taking me so many different places. For a moment, I want to go back to something you said quite some time ago when we were originally talking about the commission and you were putting together some of the sort of folks who are already supporters, and you name checked, the King, Beyonce, and Alicia Keys and other sort of Black women cultural touch points. And I just want to dig into this for a moment, not only because I will take any excuse to talk about Beyonce, but also because, you pushed forward, made possible in 2020, the authorization for the U.S. Mint to bring forward quarters that have women of color. I went out and immediately got my Maya Angelou quarter. My presidential chair at Wake Forest is the Maya Angelou
That's right.
presidential chair.
Who else is channeling Dr. Angelou other than Dr. Harris Perry? And I was so glad we got her as the very first woman on the court.
It meant so much. So I want to know about, because I think there are some who would kind of wave their hands about pop culture or cultural touchstones, but it's also a way that it meets folks where they are, and the symbols also matter. So talk to me about why the symbols matter, about why our cultural producers matter for our political change moments.
Well, they matter because people listen and they look up to them. They may not listen to me, but they'll certainly listen to Mary J. Blige or Beyonce or Alicia Keys. They may not listen to me, but their messages, these phenomenal women are creating change. And so we have to use every medium, every person who cares about justice. And so when I did the coin legislation, that took me like forever because Republicans wanted to stop it, but I wouldn't stop because I knew that one of these days I'd get it done, and I did. And I got the Republicans to support it. And so so these coins are coming out 5 a year on quarters. We got to get that $20 Harriet Tubman deal done.
Listen.
Okay, that's next. But for the time being, this is a big deal because let me tell you, it's the symbolism, but it's the stories of these women. It's the stories of Anna Wong, for instance. It's the story of Dr. Angela. It's the story of Sally Ride. It's the story of Ms. Mankiller. You know, all the Native American, Latinx, Black. We're talking about AAPI. We're talking about white women. We're talking about women who've done major transformational things in this country and never been recognized. So young people don't know their stories. So if they could do it in spite of all the challenges, you know, and all the hassles and all the barriers they face, I want young people especially to know they can do whatever they want to do. But more than that, they can lead also like these women did. They assumed their role in spite of the fact that they were being discriminated against, and they led. So they broke these barriers for themselves. They met their goals, but they continued to lead. So this was a big deal for me. I wanted these women, I wanted everyone to learn about these women. And hopefully when they pick up a quarter and see their face or the emblem on it with their name, they'll take some time and read about the woman.
I love this.
And inspire you.
And it's true. Like, seriously, it gives me a certain feeling to have to have that quarter with Maya Angelou on it. All right, I'm going to ask you one more question, but I want to just say to everyone who is listening, who's with us, this is a conversation. And after this question, I am going to turn to many of the questions that you all are sending us. If you haven't yet, if you have a question, please populate the chat box right there that should be on your screen. It depends exactly how you logged in to see us, but you should be able to see either a Q&A box or a chat box. Put your questions there. I see some of them already. I'm going to turn to those next. But first, I want to ask you one last question as point of privilege for the moderator. And that is, you know, as you talk about what we can do, whether it is bringing forward the stories of these historic women, whether it is establishing and pushing forward with the truth and reconciliation and healing, whether it is finally maybe repealing the Hyde Amendment or passing a protection of women's reproductive rights. All of that requires that our democracy works. And I think for a lot of us since January 6, 2021, and certainly even before that, but that moment in particular, it has felt terrifying, this possibility, this fragility of our democracy. How are you feeling about the health of our democracy right now?
It's very fragile. It's very fragile. I was sitting on the floor right there on January 6th and had to evacuate and get out of there before these people, and they're insurrectionists, but they attempted a coup on the United States. So sedition and treason is, you know, what they should be charged with. So I was sitting there. But what has happened as a result of the MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump is that a cult has been developed in this country, put together, and they are very close to winning in elections. That's why you got to vote, but they're very close in trying to really create a system of government that mirrors autocratic rule and fascism. And so students, you all know the 30s, you all have read about the signs of fascism. And so they're all check the box. They're all here now. And so I'm very worried about it, but I have a lot of hope because they're more us than them. They're more independents. There are more people out there who haven't bought into this. It's just that they're not voting. Okay. And I keep telling my colleagues, don't think you're going to, again, going back to my background in psychiatric social work, clinical social work, psychotherapist, psychology, all that, you can't change cults. You can't change the mentality. You have to go through a process of deprogramming and re-educating. That's how cults think. That's how you break up cults, but you can't do that with these people. So there are a lot of them. So leave them alone. We've got to fight against them. Don't try to convince them because they dig in deeper. There's so many more who don't believe in fascism, who don't want to see this country taken over by a dictator. And so those are the people we have to educate and go after and talk to. And so I'm asking students, if you know people who say, oh, I'm not going to vote, Democrats or Republicans don't mean much, remind them of where we are in terms of our democracy, and convince them that at least if they care about our freedoms, our privacy, our liberties, you can't vote for Republicans right now. You really can't, because they've all lined up in lockstep behind Donald Trump. Now, how you go tell me you go convince them not to? Please just focus your time and energy on people who say they may not vote because they don't care, and neither party is the same, both parties are the same, and really step up, because it's going to be you and me and Dr. Harris Perry, all of us who are going to protect our democracy. Don't leave it just to members of Congress, because this is going to be the voters who will vote to not allow them to be elected to take over.
All right. I want to bring in some of these wonderful questions and voices that we're beginning to again have the population of these questions. One goes back again a little bit more to dig in on the commission, and particularly the international models that you were talking about. And so this person, I don't know who it is. I'm sorry, I don't have your name on this, but is asking about that in South Africa, in Rwanda, and many other places where these commissions have been established, often relatively swiftly after great harm has been done, not always very swiftly, but relatively, perpetrators or the heirs of those perpetrators of specific harm have been part of these commissions. This person's asking about the ways that white Americans who may have been descended from those who owned enslaved people, or even sort of all of us who in some way or another benefit from the, or are complicit in the experiences of economic benefit that comes out of this long period of chattel human slavery. How do we ensure that those perpetrators and heirs of those perpetrators are part of the process?
Sure, and they need to be part of the process, okay? They need to be part of the process so they too can understand their connection, but not from a guilt perspective, but to tell the truth about what took place. It's the institutions that we have to really focus on that all around the country. I mean, the insurance industry, universities, the government, the legalization of enslaving Africans was sanctioned and was in law. And so the part that's so important in terms of the transformation and the reparations has to do with the institutions that continue to perpetrate this through a lot of their policies. But I think individuals, families of those who enslaved people, who benefited from that, should be able to talk about that and how they benefited. I've had many conversations with white people who tell me all these stories and say, yeah, you're right. We've got to deal with this. This happened in my family. Not from a guilt perspective, but it's a fact. This is how it all happened. So I think whoever asked that question is really right on point, that we have to have it, and it has to be an environment that's conducive to them coming forward to tell the truth. This is truth-telling time.
And that question was from Susan. I see your name now, so thank you for that. I want to follow up on what you just said about institutions with a question from Daniela, who asks about universities. And Daniela asks about what responsibility you think universities have to teach students, to guide them through racial justice work. I'll also broaden that question, because I think students do think of universities primarily as the classroom. And I would just say in general, with all of what universities are, employers, land users, teachers, right, wealth builders, of those institutions, what is some of the work universities need to be doing to be reparative?
Well, if I were a student at a university right now, I would set up a truth commission at my university, and I would dig into the university's past practices. I would have students, we'd discuss it, we'd figure it out. But, I went to Mills College and University of California, and I was president of Black Student Union, and I dug in. I was a community worker with the Black Panther Party, and I dug in when I was at Mills and UC, because they did not do it, not necessarily on repairing the damage, but they weren't doing anything in Oakland to help poor Black people and lift them out of poverty. And so I made the universities invest in the Black Panther Party and other institutions. So
Mhm.
you all would figure it out, but I would say students should really start with their own university and dig in and just check the record out and then have these commissions at the university level now. That's what I would do.
It's such a good point. I mean, we were just talking about the fragility of democracy. And of course, universities, among the many other things that they are also laboratories for democracy, right? So it's both that you should be involved beyond your university walls, but this is your opportunity, right, to make change. You're part of an institution.
That's right.
I'm interested also in this question from Kevin, who is wanting to think about, perhaps inspired by the global international work that has long been a part of your career. Kevin is asking about the ways that individuals who've been involved in these commissions in other places, especially those impacted by enslavement and colonialism in Latin America and in the Caribbean, what they can teach us, or if they could be involved in the U.S. Commission.
Yeah, and they should be, because some of the commissions weren't as successful as others. And you know why? Because they didn't have the reparations part. They didn't have the HR 40. They didn't have the repair the damage. It was only truth-telling and healing. You got to have it together. So I think it would be very important. And let me tell you, you mentioned I work on a global, well, we live on this planet. I've always been an internationalist. I lived in England for 2 years. My oldest son was born in London, you know, and that's when I realized I was part of the majority of the world. I wasn't a minority. It was like, come on, you know? So ever since then, I felt like the world was mine too. And so I'm the UN representative to the from the House of Representatives, the Democratic representative to the United Nations. I actually helped get started. And I want you to listen to this. It's the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, okay? And the International Independent Expert Mechanism to Advance Racial Justice and Equality in Law Enforcement. That's for our own country, the United States, okay? So I'm bringing the issues of oppression and racism to the United States, to the United Nations, and getting them to establish, with our State Department's approval, these forums. And I testified before the General Assembly this year, and testified and presented a speech on reparations and on HR 19, and why the global family, the global community, because you know, reparations in the Caribbean, I mean, this is a movement, a worldwide movement. And so we're continuing to do this on a global level. And so, yes, we need people from those countries to be able to at least be advisors or, you know, participate in some way so that we can understand, again, what worked, what didn't work, and what we can learn from other countries also.
I so appreciate knowing that about your more recent work within the UN. I know that you've been doing this global work for so long, and it is, you know, just as a reminder, stands in the tradition of Paul Robeson, stands in the tradition of Du Bois, right? Of those who have long pointed out that we exist, right? We're not just Black folk in America, right? We exist in this world. I wanted to bring
just say one thing about
please.
W.E. Du Bois, Dr. Harris Perry?
Yeah.
Okay. I've established with the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, it's not the Congressional Black Caucus, but it's the Institute, an NGO at the UN. So we have representation, Black people at the United Nations through this NGO. And I was recently in Ghana, and you know, they're building a new beautiful memorial library to Dr. Du Bois. If you read his speech when the United Nations was founded in 46, 47, he talks about the UN dealing with the human rights issues of African Americans and the importance of that. And he took an NAACP delegation, brought it to San Francisco. Now Malcolm X called for a UN presence of Black Americans. So this is a historical piece that once again, I'm really glad you raised that, and glad we're talking about it, because young people need to capture this right now, because people of color, especially African Americans especially, need to embrace the United Nations and our work there. This is the decade of people of African descent all around the world. We're doing a lot of work around in the United States. And so I'm trying to get young people who are involved in other domestic issues, but in global affairs also so important.
I asked about universities. I'm going to now ask about another institution that I'm a big part of, and that is the U.S. media. There was a recent Warner Brothers media executive who said that their multinational corporation is ditching diversity, that it is courting middle America. For those of us who work in all kinds of media, although I think public media is somewhat different over here in the world of public radio, but we have an accountability to the public. But there's also this kind of notion of, as you were pointing out, sort of, almost like the ratings or like what people will listen to, who they will listen to. What do you think is the responsibility of the U.S. media writ large, whether public media or corporate media, in a moment of a fragile democracy, to tell the truth around questions of race?
Well, that's it, to tell the truth. I mean, the period. That's what, if you ask, that's what the media is for. And of course, they're not doing it, but because corporations drive it or whatever. But I think the role of the media, especially in this fragile moment of protecting and preserving our democracy, they've got to tell the truth, and they've got to use the language. They've got to educate people in telling the truth. What does fascism mean? What are the signs? Okay, and I think, let's see, some reporters and some, Rachel is doing a good job. She did a great job last night, putting it in context of today, right? And so the role of the media, I think, is educating and informing and telling the truth. Because otherwise, right now, you talk about a media that that is about not telling the truth. The antithesis to that is telling the truth. So you can't be in the middle if you're the media, when you have so many forces who are forces that are anti-democratic. You cannot stay in the middle and fumble and go through what the media does, well, on this hand and on that other hand, and boom, 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 boom. No, you got to be the antithesis of that, and you got to tell the truth to counter that garbage and that hatred and that really the lies that are coming out on the other side.
I have a question here from someone named Lexi, who I'm almost certain, based on this question, is the Lexi from my class at Wake Forest University, because it sounds like a very smart Lexi question. And I think it's connected to my discussion with you about cultural icons. But Lexi is asking about the way that cultural icons, especially in this moment, and cultural institutions might actually be doing not racial justice work, but performative activism. So if we think back to 2020 and all of a sudden, right, the Black Lives Matter painted on the end zones in the NFL, or folks who had never shown an interest in questions of racial justice, right, sort of plastering their T-shirts or their corporate products with Black Lives Matter. Is there a way for us to also hold accountable not only our elected leaders, but to hold accountable these cultural institutions, these parts of our popular experiences, to being authentic in their and rather than performative in the work they're doing around race?
Yeah, and authenticity is key right now. And I think to hold them accountable, if they're public institutions or if they're elected officials, it's up to us. It's up to people who elect people to hold them accountable. It really is. If it's a private corporations, it's up to us. If we're spending money with those corporations, it's up to us to organize. And I'm so proud of what young people have done, because already there's a culture shift. And I mean, we see, of course, the backlash, which is okay. There's going to always be backlash, but we have to keep moving. And, I have a bill that would require art to have arts through the teach issues around racial justice and equity through mediums that the National Endowment for the Arts funds. That would be a criteria. And so I think we have to do this every which way. And I hope I can give you my bill number later. I don't have it with me, but it's a really great bill. All of the artists and NGOs and people who are in the cultural space are really supporting it, because they know we need equity and justice integrated throughout every medium in the arts. So it's extremely important, and you got to hold them accountable, because we buy stuff. They need us to survive. And elected officials, you elect them and you need to hold them accountable. That's what democracy is supposed to be about.
You're being so generous with your time. I kind of looked up and noticed that the sun has set behind me, in the time that we've been here together. But I do want to get in just a few more of folks. If you could just see how engaged this Q&A is. So I want to be sure I get in a few more. There is a question, and I'm going to combine two. There's one question asking, what do you mean by reparations, or what do we mean? What could one mean by reparations? And then there's also a question here from Anne, who's asking about how reparations could work in practice. So I'm going to kind of combine those two together and say, what do we mean and how could it really work?
Yeah, and that's a question that's always asked, but you know what? That's why we need a commission, first of all, because you develop and execute at the same time. I mean, you're developing. Look at California. I'm really proud of California. We have the first commission on reparations in the country, California. And so they're doing the hard work. And they're identifying ways, they're developing the argument and doing the research and presenting it to the public, holding hearings, and then they're developing reparations. So it's to study and develop. And that's what happens. So we can't say, because you don't know what, I mean, we could speculate. I would, say, we still didn't get our 40 acres and a mule times interest, but who knows what it would end up being. I mean, just look at, I'll give one example. Cannabis, I co-chair the Cannabis Caucus, right? Fought for years and years and years to expunge the records and establish a restorative justice fund and some tax credits and benefits for those who've been impacted by these horrific, terrible, racist policies that were embedded in the war on drugs. Okay, so how do we make people who are suffering behind this through felony convictions on their records or misdemeanor convictions behind unjust laws? So what do? We've looked at it, we said expunge the records, restorative justice. And so that's what we're working on. And we're going to get there. You heard President Biden, he came out with, we've been pushing hard, and that's been a few Black members really pushing, myself in court, Senator Booker. And so we're going to get there. But I think that's an example of what we can do. But we really don't know until the record is there. And that's what California is doing right now.
I love this question. It's combining a couple of things. So I had a question earlier that I was sort of sitting on for a moment, but now that I've got one to really tie it with, I just love. So a Wake Forest student who asked about the connections between environmental justice and racial justice. And then I love how this was made very clear here. This is from Crystal. And the question is there a way that we might think about reparation, perhaps in a somewhat more targeted sense, if we think about, for example, Black and Brown communities, poor communities affected by environmental injustices in places like Flint, Jackson, Mississippi, so that even as we're thinking about the big work, that we also focus in on, here is a specific harm done in the recent past that we could look for reparative action on right now.
Absolutely. And that's why I say form these commissions at the local level. Believe you me, that's been happening in some communities around the country. And I think that is absolutely necessary. Until we get the national commission established, do the local ones. Make sure that in Flint, for example, people who have been debilitated, they've got now injuries and diseases that are going to be with them all of their lives. And so we owe them at least their health care to be paid for. We owe them whatever justice demands in that instance. And so, yeah, community by community. Let me tell you, I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and most of the people I grew up with are dead or sick because there was a plant, Orozco, few blocks from where I lived, that emitted all of these pollutants. And there was a Black and brown neighborhood, and people my age got breast cancer. My sister has multiple sclerosis. My mother had COPD. My grandfather had severe bronchitis. People have died in my neighborhood, 2 blocks, of all of these diseases that have been directly related to that plant emitting those toxic pollutants, okay, in El Paso. The record is there. Finally got them to stop it. Lawsuit took place, but I don't know. I mean, I didn't get anything out of it. So I don't even know what people who were affected got out of that. But it should have been a commission there to make sure those families who were affected and whose relatives are sick and who will never be well they should have been compensated for that in whatever way they wanted to be compensated. It was deadly, and it's still happening everywhere in the country now. So yes, that should happen.
Speaking of lawsuits, the family of Mr. Floyd has filed a lawsuit against Kanye West for his comments about George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd by former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. So I just want to ask, I felt pretty upset about those comments. Do you think maybe all Black folks could have standing to really ask Mr. West to stand down on this?
Yeah, why don't we look at filing an amicus brief and be a friend of the court?
For real. For real, like just stop, sir, just stop.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, because it's impacting all of us. It's horrible.
It is. And so I want to end on that, which is you have talked both tonight and also frequently throughout your career and the work that you've done about the connections between racial justice and criminal justice. You just gave us some of that. Talk to me about, to go back to the notion of visioning. We know that many people are going to go to the polls over the course of the next few weeks. They're going to make a decision in these 2022 midterms, and many of them are going to make it based on this issue of crime that's out there. But I want you to take us to a slightly different place. Envision for me a world of public safety. Tell me what our communities would look like if they were safe, if we were in a space of healing. What would it feel like? What would we be doing? Who would we be to one another if we were in, not safe by how it's being defined in 2022, but like truly safe and just communities?
Well, and that's what we have to seek is out of public safety, is to be able to live in safe communities. And when you live in safe communities, remember, we're traumatized by living in communities that are not safe, by having to deal with always police misconduct, police brutality, by having to deal with gun violence. I mean, this, and I'm in Oakland, so my city and other cities around the country now are experiencing some really terrible issues around public safety. But it's not going to work. The solution is not going to work the same old way by just adding more police officers. We've got to really figure out what's going to make our community safe. I had a meeting last week talking to people about how we may train some trusted messengers to help keep our community safe. People who come from the community, because we want safe communities. It's not like we don't want safe communities, but how do we do this in a new way and reimagine it? And so what we want out of that is a healthy community so we can live a healthy life. We want our kids, if they're walking to school, to be able to walk to school. We want them to be able to go to school without having to go through metal detectors, because we know the guns are gone. They're off the street. The gun safety laws have been passed, so we don't have to worry about kids getting killed in school. And so we want everybody to be able to live in a house or an apartment, whether they own or not, a condo, wherever they want to live, knowing that it's safe and that they don't have to pay $10,000 a month to live in a safe community. Why, if I'm paying $800 a month for rent, why isn't my community as safe as those who are paying $3,500, $4,000 a month? So I think the inequities are glaring in terms of the social determinants of healthcare and everything that's taking place in our community. And public safety is a big thing, and so we have to imagine a community that's safe and that where we can live freely like every other person can live if they have money, and those are primarily white people. And so I mean, we can't not talk about that. Everyone wants to be safe, including Black and brown people. And we want to have the quality of life that everybody has, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of the zip code, and regardless of who we love, regardless of what we look like, regardless of our background. We should be able to live a decent life as being part of this country. And until that's done, we got to keep fighting.
Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California, it is always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. And again, thank you for your generosity, your spirit, your time, your intellect, and your vision. But more than anything, thank you for your decades of work. And yeah, we Black women, but for real, you can get tired. And I appreciate that your work feels almost as though we can't be. And so I hope we're all here to hold you up, because you've been holding us up. I truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You're an inspiration to myself and to so many others. And I just want to tell you what you're doing with your students, their questions, their commitment, their brilliance. I can't say enough about this. These students are my inspiration, and I know they're your inspiration. They keep you going. And so the young people shall lead. I mean, we've got to secure the planet for them. And so that's what keeps me going. And I know that's what keeps you going. So thank you all. Thank you, students. It's really been great to be with you. I hope to see everybody soon, too. One of these days.
I just want to say on behalf of the Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability Project and Harvard's IOP, we are eternally grateful for you, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, for your joining us tonight to kick off this conference and for your leadership. Just the truth telling that you model for all of us is an inspiration. And your last response to Melissa's question just reminds us that a lot of this is plain old common sense, and that racism is partly designed to convince us that the thing that we see with our own eyes is not really the thing that we see with our own eyes. So we have to be fiercely honest with ourselves. And I'm grateful for you demonstrating that and reminding and inspiring us this evening. And thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us, and for your students for carrying them into this conversation. And of course, I want to thank everyone who tuned in this evening, whether it was on YouTube, Zoom, or Whova. We are grateful for your attention. I just want to let you know that tomorrow we kick things off at 9:30 in the morning, where we start the full day of the conference. Our first panel will begin at 10 o'clock. It will pick up this conversation. It's called The Great Retreat, and it is the story, the history, the recognition of the shift from affirmative action as a reparative program to diversity, which became a symbolic form of tokenism. And so you're going to hear from some amazing experts. In the afternoon, or just before the afternoon, we're going to come back to this question about how you actually confront the past, and hear from international experts as well as national experts who've done memorialization work. And in the afternoon, we also will have a keynote address looking at the land back movement among Native Americans. And then finally, at our third and concluding panel for the afternoon, we're going to talk specifically about reparations and how to get there. So I want to say good night to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.